I like Jane Ellen Malden's reading so much because it happens so much in our country and throughout the world. People blaming God, the creative spirit of life, the love that is between people and amongst nature for the bad things that happen. And I just don't buy that. I think that we are together this morning because of the power of community. Because of the power of community. And I'm thinking about community so much as I have taken on this new position as the disaster response coordinator that means so much after Sandy. Communities coming together, people pooling their resources, pooling their energy, coming together in healing and in hope and in strength, just as that song said. Jersey Strong. But I'm also thinking of community because of an experience I had this past summer at the second largest annual gathering of Unitarian Universalists in this country, the Southeast Unitarian Universalist Summer Institute, fondly known as SUSI in Radford, Virginia, that I found out Linda and I went to this summer and how meaningful it was for both of us. At SUSI, nearly 1,200 Unitarian Universalists worship together, dedicate our children, just as you're going to have, bless our teens through a bridging ceremony, offer diverse workshops, go on nature trips, and we eat together in the same cafeteria, and we sleep in the same dorms, and we listen to music, and we dance. So many of us do so love to dance. If you think of this congregation's weekly Sunday service and you multiply it by 7 days, you get some idea, and hundreds of people also. My life partner, Alan, and I took on the challenge of an Argentine tango dance class during SUSI. Usually, if I talk about this experience, I get all kinds of, oh, really, kind of looks and sighs. We had some idea what this dance class would be like when we watched a YouTube video. And in the YouTube video, maybe you've seen them, with the Argentine tango, their legs start twisting and twirling around each other, and they lean on one another. It's a different kind of dance entirely. So we scaled our expectations way back when we saw that video. I had no way of knowing what would come out of that class, commingled with the rest of the lessons from a week spent in close community. When you're in a community, what happens to you? You are transformed by that experience of being with one another, of having similar experiences and different experiences, all in close proximity to one another. Now, Alan and I had excellent instructors. It was by a couple originally from Romania, Olympia and Andy. And Andy was this big bear of a man. He would say when he danced with me individually and would try to give me some instruction, "Don't be afraid, you can't knock me over." Now that really wasn't what I was afraid of. I was afraid of my feet getting all tied up and just not being able to do the steps. My lack of coordination getting the best of me. Olympia, on the other hand, is graceful movement personified. Andy would teach us the cardinal points of the tango. Safety. Safety first with your partner and with yourself. Connection between the couple. And musicality. In this tango, the couple forms like an A frame. They lean on each other, lean into one another, and they can feel each other and the movements of the other through that leaning. The dance is all about connecting and remaining connected, learning to lead with confidence and compassion, learning to follow with trust and attentiveness. Both partners usually have their eyes closed so that they can feel each other's movement and the flow of the music better, and feel the joy that takes place. As a matter of dance etiquette, it was explained to us that the leader does not push their partner around the dance floor, but rather invites their partner to join them in a certain direction, in a certain movement. And though both of us could describe to you over and over Andy's repeated instructions, step, collect, regain your balance, step again, this dance was not easy. And it brought up every issue we have with trust and intimacy, with closeness, with connection, and with community. And I emphasize community because the primary goal, they told us, was to go back home after this dance class and join a milonga, which is a community that dances the Argentine tango. A little over 1 week from today will mark the 1-year anniversary since Superstorm Sandy struck our metro New York area and so much of New Jersey. Now, I know Ocean County was hard hit. I imagine you remember kind of viscerally what it was like in those days after the storm. Many of us called to respond to the suffering of our neighbors. The North Shore of Staten Island, where I live, was relatively unscathed. It was the South Shore where most of the damage took place. So most of us were merely inconvenienced by loss of electricity. I bet that's familiar to you. You experienced that as well. The costly and sometimes dangerous and occasionally fatal falling of trees. And the shortage of gasoline. Remember the gasoline rationing process that prevented us from helping our neighbors over on the South Shore because we couldn't get gas to go over there. It was the South Shore that felt Sandy's full fury. In those dizzying weeks and months after Sandy, the Unitarian Church of Staten Island that I served at the time learned a new dance. We opened the church for the fledgling meetings of the Long-Term Recovery Organization, and the, excuse me, the area that's usually reserved for children and youth, like your area, was opened up for volunteers from Virginia, Maine, and upstate New York. There was another small congregation, very tiny congregation in Susquehanna Valley, Pennsylvania, that partnered with us. They had been struck by Hurricane Lee about a year before, and they knew all about hurricanes, and they wanted to do something with their smallness, something that they could do that they were able to do. And so they provided us with letters and drawings from their children that gave encouragement and hope to the children on Staten Island that had lost everything. And they also had a grocery card program where they, members of their congregation bought grocery cards, and then they gave those to us to distribute amongst those people. Oh, there's a train coming through. And so we distributed those gift cards to the people who needed it the most. People like undocumented immigrants who weren't eligible for other kinds of services and assistance from FEMA and other programs often, who had rents, people who were renters and couldn't get back an apartment or find affordable housing. Feeding stations where they served hot meals to people and they ran out of money to provide meals for folks that desperately needed it. And seniors who had disabilities and accessibility issues. So that little tiny congregation, I think you could see all the good. And then they brought a Mayfair to us where we celebrated together with the people who had volunteered for like 8 months. All of that from a tiny congregation. It was, and it is, an intricate community dance, this work of recovery that we do. It's often improvisational, just like that tango. To respond adequately to the remaining critical needs of Sandy survivors, we need some people who can lead and others who can follow. We need to think of our disaster-ravaged areas as being out of balance, in need of pausing, regaining that connection with one another, finding balance once again. And any movement we make creates the need to regroup again, to consider the safety and comfort of those with unmet needs, those who have flashbacks whenever it rains. I've spoken to some people in New Jersey, some families that remember well going out in their cars with, they had 2 cars, and they had 2 children, and so each parent took a child in a separate car and went through the flooded streets not knowing how high the water was going to rise and if they would get out safely. So they have flashbacks every time that it rains again. Many people across this country, and even in our own neighborhoods, they think that all this survival and all the recovery has already taken place, that we're back to a new normal, whatever the heck that means. I'm really not sure. Recently, I visited the Monmouth County Long-Term Recovery Group, and I saw there Camp Evans in the process of transformation, building it back to house volunteers in the future. The first phase will house like 50 volunteers, and the second phase up to 150 volunteers. I've heard from the director of the Friends of the Rockaways in Queens about the food desert. Have you all heard about the food desert? Do you know what that means? Some of you do and some of you don't. Well, he explained to me that there are only 2 grocery stores, or there were only 2 grocery stores in all of the Rockaways to serve about 135,000 people. One of the large groceries closed up. So people have to go to the bodegas to buy food. Now, you know, bodegas are not known generally for being cheap, and they are not cheap in the Rockaways. Everywhere I go, I see houses that desperately need rebuilding still. And the suffering here throughout New Jersey's 9 core counties, I know that there are 16 or 17 counties that had some recovery programs and long-term recovery groups, but I think that there were 9 core counties that were designated as needing major recovery efforts. You all know far better than me the damage that has been done here in New Jersey, and particularly in Ocean County. People throughout New Jersey and New York are still staying in hotels and shelters. They're on the beaches, some of them living on the beaches in Staten Island, in their cars in Brooklyn. Many people who lived in apartments and have no place to go because sometimes the landlords can't afford to build it, or sometimes they were illegal apartments, meaning that the basements were not really, didn't have the proper permits to house people. There's an acute shortage of affordable rentals here all throughout all of these areas, and there was beforehand, but now of course it's compounded. And many of the wetlands, the beaches, the bays are still covered with debris. The truth is that returning to any sense of a new normal will take a minimum of 3 years and more likely up to 8 years. You know that Katrina happened 8 years ago in August. And this is not looking much more likely to be, the recovery to be met. And who knows, of course, as we all are aware of when the next storm or the next kind of disaster may strike. Very soon after October 29th, our regional Unitarian Universalist group known as SURGE, which stands for the Central East Regional Group. You know how us Unitarian Universalists love our acronyms. We always have to have the alphabet soup. But SURGE is composed of the Metro New York District, which is our district that you all are in, Joseph Priestley District throughout Washington and parts of Maryland, Ohio Meadville and St. Lawrence districts. And SURGE began a disaster relief fund right afterwards. They've collected about $375,000 to date, which has gone to congregations, it's gone to individual members and community partners to rebuild, to reconnect, and to gain some degree of balance in the wake of Sandy's destruction. And there are more unmet needs that we get in all the time that we have applications for through SURGE. SURGE also received, they applied for a grant and received a grant from the large grants panel through the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Shelter Rock. That SURGE grant is funding a part-time disaster response coordinator to bring other Unitarian Universalists into our area to help with coordinating volunteers and find housing, and to mobilize local volunteers as well. I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve as that volunteer disaster response coordinator. And speaking on behalf of SURGE, the Central East Regional Group of Districts, we are hoping that your congregation, that you will join with other Unitarian Universalists to engage in the ongoing dance of rebuilding and response in this Metro New York area. We're still in what disaster preparedness trainers call the earliest stages of recovery. After the waves of donations come in, after the initial influx of all the helping hands, comes the rebuilding. And we're really just in the beginning stages of recovery, creating the long-term recovery groups that will sustain the efforts for the long haul. I attend long-term recovery meetings throughout Brooklyn, Staten Island, New Jersey, Staten Island, all of these places, in Queens if they get some of it together. The long-term recovery groups and the community constituents that are a part of them deal with the big picture. And that big picture is that those whose lives were already difficult before the storm because of race, because of immigration status, because of accessibility issues or vocational issues, financial, economic stress, environmental, mobility kinds of problems, they did not, and they do not have the same access to resources and assistance. Their problems are compounded. In this new ministry that I've taken on, I'm reminded of the audacious passion of Unitarian Universalists. I've always been impressed with it. That's why I became a Unitarian Universalist. Because we respond to the call for justice and compassion and service. Youth groups, right after the storm from Pittsburgh and Iowa City, came to New Jersey. One of them stayed at Murray Grove the same time that this congregation had a retreat, I know. I saw some of you there. Many congregations plan to come on winter breaks or spring breaks, summer breaks. As vacations end, though, and people go back to school as they've done by now in the fall, the volunteer pool dwindles down to nothing. So we've got a new strategy together, and in mid-August, we had a Long Island Day of Service where 63 people, or some statistics were there were up to 87 people, but we all got together on Long Island to clean up the Long Beach Bay. And so we had people from 4 congregations, 4 Unitarian Universalist congregations, at Shelter Rock, at Garden City, at Original Blessing in the Brooklyn area. There was one more too. I'm trying to remember that one. But anyhow, we all got together and we teamed with city employees from Long Beach and with All Hands and with another grantee award winner, which was the Sustainable Long Island, and we all worked together. It was the most diverse, most multi-generational, multicultural event. We had diverse religions present there. It was really like seeing the beloved community in action. And we collected this inordinate amount of trash there, with probably the most impressive being that this one community organization, All Hands, got a motorcycle that they pulled out of the bay. And so we have pictures of this motorcycle getting hauled out of there. That was the first of what I hope will be many opportunities for local Unitarian Universalists to join together with other faiths, with other community organizations for a day or a weekend of service. I believe we shouldn't restrict a day of service to Martin Luther King Jr. Day. You know, that we often propose that we have some kinds of service on that day. But why should it just be one day? We need days of service everywhere and throughout the year because the need is so great and because the storms are happening more frequently now. Those 100-year storms that we've had 3 in the recent number of years for what's supposed to be 100-year storms. So obviously the little timeline is going down a bit. And it doesn't really matter how small our congregation, via what I told you about the congregation in Susquehanna Valley that's very small as well. What we can do when we all pull together is extraordinary. And we can do whatever our strengths are, even though compassion fatigue sometimes pulls at us from every end. We're planning a day of service in Monmouth County on November 2nd in Union Beach, which is mostly blue-collar workers there. And they were devastated by Sandy. And I hope to learn directly from you after the service more about what's happening here in Ocean County, what kinds of things we might be able to get going here, and to bring in others at those vacation times and break times when we can have other Unitarian Universalists come into this area and do the necessary work of recovery. Because it's part of my ministry to awaken in you the spirit of the dance of community. That dance that we are all called to join in. No matter what abilities we have, no matter what kind of awkwardness we might have, we're all called to join in the dance with this spinning earth, with each other, and to regain connection every time we take a step, again and again and again. And so I invite you to join in this dance, into this dance that we all do.